Hello and welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. I hope you're doing very, very well. How long until holiday blues are over? I've never had holiday blues like this. David and I got back from our honeymoon a week today and we miss it. Yeah, we really miss it. How long till they're over? Tell me. But today I'm going to be reminiscing a little on the reading that I did on that holiday, because today is my June reading wrap up, so I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. 9 books in the month of June. The stats, well, 1 book I finished on the 31st of May, but that's been brought forward to this because I'd already filmed my May wrap up by then. 9 books, 7 of which I owned, which was 78% of my reading. That's really good. 1 was an audiobook, 1 was a library book, 9% of my reading either way. So that means I've read 62 books this year so far. 31 of them have been books that I've owned, which has been 50% of my reading. 16 of them have been audiobooks, 26% of my reading. 14 of them have been library books, that's 23% of my reading. And 1 of them I borrowed off my sister, 1% of my reading. So let's talk about the books. So Enchantment was the first book I went to. Look at the hands on her, hips on her. By Catherine May. I listened to the audiobook of this. Now what I did, this was a bit special actually. It hasn't come to fruition because it needs a lot of work on it. But I took a day off and I went for a walk and listened to a whole audiobook. The audiobook was 5 hours long and I went for a really long walk. I did like 24,000 steps. My legs the next day were hurting. And I listened to the whole thing. And the plan was that I would sort of walk and talk about the book and the things that it was making me think. But it was so windy that day that you couldn't hear a word I was saying. So I made lots of notes while I was out for this walk. And that video will be coming up with a sort of voiceover on it of things. But this book really, for a word, Enchantment is the name of the title. It really got me thinking about what my interests are and what I'm enchanted by. I really like the way it was set into sort of like fire, water, air, and what's the other one? Earth. But yeah, it was definitely one that I will revisit, and I really want to listen to or read her book Wintering, which I'm also told is very, very good. So yeah, it really got me thinking about what enchants and excites me and what my passions are and how they've changed over the years and stuff. So must edit that video, that'll be coming up. I'm going to do a series as well, I think, where I go for a walk and listen to an audiobook. It was very cute. I took like a little picnic, like made myself a cheese and mango chutney sandwich and went out, and yeah, it was really, really lovely and like nice to spend that amount of time by myself thinking about one particular thing, which was me. So yeah, there'll be a video of that coming up soon. Next up is Marmee. I got this out from the library. This is the library book I read this month, by Jessica George, and yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. I read it on the 1st of the month, and it's a book about a young woman based very much on Jessica's life. So this young woman's father is unwell and has been unwell a lot of her adult life, and she's been sort of working her job in publishing but also as a carer for him. And when tragedy strikes and he dies, she sort of maybe starts having a little look at her life and the things that she'd been foregoing in order to care for her father, and the sort of roles that she'd been in whilst caring for her father, as her mother had moved to Africa and was working out there. But yeah, I thought this really managed to sort of look at grief and loss of a parent and depression without feeling like too sort of like grief stricken or depressing. It really felt like it was a good look from above, and like I say, I think Jessica, the author of this book, had a lot of these experiences in her own life. But yeah, I would highly recommend, enjoyed it a lot. Then I read Preloved by Lauren Bravo. This was a women's contemporary fiction book written about a young woman, Gwen, and her sort of being, I say young woman, well, I guess she's mid-30s and I'm mid-30s and I consider myself a young woman. She is sort of at a bit of a moment in her life where she's not really sure what's going on. There's not much in the way of relationships, and she's just left her job, and she begins volunteering in a charity shop. And it's a real celebration. I follow Lauren Bravo on Instagram, and she's very celebratory of charity shops, and this book is a celebration of charity shops. But what I appreciated about it was that it wasn't all sort of like every single thing you'll find in a charity shop will be a find. Like there was some real sort of like background stuff as what goes on in charity shops, and how a lot of the stuff is not old enough to be retro or considered like a find, but it's not new enough to be relevant, and there's that sort of like hinterland. So I guess at the moment it will be things like llamas stuff, and like I'm sure in a couple of months time there'll be a lot of stuff being donated that is to do with the coronation and stuff. So it's always sort of just like a little bit behind, and like how can that be treasure to someone? But what I liked about this, so the story itself is about Gwen, but there's also stories in there from the objects that have been donated, or how those objects end up getting donated, and whether there's sort of like what the feelings behind donating those objects are, or whether or not there's no feelings at all, and then how those objects may get passed on to the next person. So yeah, I thought it was a good celebration of charity shops. I was more interested in the charity shop side of life than I was actually Gwen's life, but yeah, I thought it was measured, and like I say, it wasn't all like everything you find is going to be such a vintage treasure. It was sort of like, there is some tat in there and you will have to look through that tat if you want to find stuff you want. But yes, I thought it was enjoyable. Then we're on to the books that I read on my honeymoon. So I read 4 books on my honeymoon. You may well have seen my honeymoon TBR where I took 10 books away with me. I read 4, I started 2 more, both of which I haven't finished, because when I got back I had book club reading, and then I wanted to read Yellowface, which more on that later. So yeah, there will be more books that I will finish in July that will be part of my honeymoon reading. I had a nice time reading on my honeymoon, but I didn't read any bangers. I don't have any of the books here with me, because what I did, and you might have seen my honeymoon vlog, is once I'd finished reading them, I wrote in them, I had a lovely time reading this book while I was cruising the fjords of Norway between these dates on the Aurora. Hopefully you'll enjoy it too. And then wrote my channel name and my Instagram handle on there. And I'm desperate for someone, no one's done it yet, so that's 4 books that are out there with that in. I'm desperate for someone to either get in touch via Instagram or YouTube to say, I found that book and these are my thoughts, because that's just my dream. But yeah, so here are the 4 books I read. So the first one was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I wanted page turners when I went away, and this was not, I wasn't like absolutely gripped to it, but it was very, very easy to read, readable. And David had read this before. This had been recommended to David and myself as people who enjoyed The Appeal by Janice Hallett, that we might enjoy this, which is a YA book about a murder that took place in a high school, and then the subsequent suicide of somebody who was accused of that murder. And it's a look into what happened there, and it's very sort of like suspend your disbelief, because it's a girl doing a school project who looks into it and then finds out stuff that the police didn't find out, and all of this sort of daft stuff. But like I said, I enjoyed it. It was sort of, there were elements of The Appeal in there, in terms of like, there were sort of like logbook entries, text messages, and things like that, which I do enjoy in books. Oh, I should have mentioned, because that was also something I liked in Marmee as well, was that there was a lot of like Google searches and text messages and stuff, and that really gives you an insight into like someone as their real self. I feel like when you're texting your mates, that's when you're most yourself. So yeah, I enjoyed that. But yeah, it wasn't great. David had bought the second one with, so he's read this before and he enjoyed it. He read it when we were on our mini moon actually, and he took the second one with him, and I thought, oh well, if I love the first one, the second one's there ready and waiting. I don't think I'll continue with the series. I didn't hate it or anything, it was just fine, but yeah, I don't feel like I need to go on with the series. The next one is The Cabin in the Mountains by Robert Ferguson. This was a book kindly bought for me by lovely Jen Campbell. And we were having a discussion, because I told her I was going to Norway, and I was talking about how I wanted to read a book like Names for the Sea, Strangers in Iceland, which is a book that Sarah Moss has written about relocating to Iceland and what that was like for her. And Jen went into Daunt Books, which is a bookshop where all the books are arranged by country, which I love, and I must visit again. I've only ever been there once. And she said, I found this and I think you really like it, and bought it for me, and I took it away on my honeymoon. Now, what I will say before I get onto the sort of like more negative aspects of the book is that I found the book chock full of stuff about life in Norway and stats, and Robert as an English person going to live in Norway and how we might have ended up doing there. But Robert himself as an author, I found him a bit of a miserable shit, if I'm being honest, which meant I couldn't fully enjoy the book. And I think where I really enjoyed Names for Iceland, and I sort of kept thinking about this book as the Norwegian equivalent of Names for the Sea by Sarah Moss, and I really liked reading Sarah's account, and because she's a woman and had sort of more in common with me than I did with Robert Ferguson, because also I'm not sure that a lot of maybe our political ideas would align and stuff like that. I think I kept comparing the opinions and the narrative to that. So I found the stuff about Norway so interesting, and the history of it, and we were also, so I was reading this when I was in Norway, like I said, and we went on an excursion on a coach trip, and a lot of the stuff that the guy who was doing the coach trip was saying, I'd already read in the book, so I was like, I feel like I know a little bit. So there are stuff in there that I did find interesting, but yeah, the whole the voice wasn't my fave voice. Third book I read was By the Book by Jasmine Guillory. Now this was a lot of fun to read on my honeymoon. I wanted to read a romance. I'd read a book by Jasmine Guillory before, which was set over Christmas, and I can't bloody remember what it's called. So I'd already had sort of like an experience of knowing what her writing was like, and it's fun and chipper and enjoyable. This is a romance book loosely based on the story of Beauty and the Beast, and I really enjoyed, in a sort of like eye-rolling, chuckling way, the reaches that Jasmine Guillory went to in order to sort of like elbow in the story of Beauty and the Beast. For instance, I mean, how can you make the like keeping a woman in your home against her will romantic? But what they did is that it was set in the publishing world, and our main character had gone to the house of Beau Towers, who's sort of like the Beast character. He'd promised to write a memoir, a tell-all memoir about his childhood. He had celebrity parents, and he hadn't delivered, and she'd been sent there, and he sort of said, oh well, I'm only going to do it if you stay here and give me a pep talk every day. So that's how they got around that, and her sort of like then falling for him. But other ways they'd crowbarred in Beauty and the Beast was so lol. Like he had a housekeeper that he just called Kettle. So like, you know, like Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast the film, like, so they just sort of like lifted that. Also, she really liked a tea, and that was from a shop called Off to the Cupboard, which is like a line from Beauty and the Beast, and there was just stuff like that. I was just like, this is so funny. But I can't say I didn't enjoy it. I really can't. I found it quite fun. I also sometimes when I'm reading these romance novels, I find the sex scenes either a bit full on or a bit cringe, but there was no sex scenes in this, but it still felt a bit sexy. So like, that was like impressive thing to be able to do. So yeah, also if you were thinking, if you know someone, if you like, your mum likes romance, or someone, or your nan likes romance, and you wanted to buy that person a romance book that isn't like chock full of like proper hardcore shagging, then this would be a great opportunity for that, or if that's something you may well even like. And then the last book that I read on my honeymoon was Still Life by Sarah Winman. One of my lovely viewers kindly bought this for me when I said I wanted to read it on my honeymoon, and yeah, I really did enjoy it. It's set in Italy. It follows the lives of two characters after a chance meeting during the war in Italy. And we follow their lives back at home, like sort of like the lead up to their meeting, and then following on from that. And my God, like, if you are going to Italy, take this bloody book with you, or read it, because it is so evocative of what it's like, and just aspects of life in Italy, and the food in Italy, and the sort of like community aspects, and that's sort of lovely. And I had that sort of like the same vibe as I've mentioned earlier, a book that I haven't even read this month but I keep bringing up, Strangers in Iceland, Names of the Sea, whereby it's English people relocating to Italy, and also in a time where that wasn't something that really happened very often. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and I really like the characters a lot. She can really weave these amazing characters. In some ways it really reminded me of, like, I remember first reading Behind the Scenes at the Museum by Kate Atkinson, and being like absolutely mesmerised by this whole picture and this whole cast of people that she'd created, and I felt like that when I was reading this. The only thing I will say is that I didn't love the way the speech was written. Again, I've given away this book, so I've got no examples for you, but no speech marks were used, and I found that quite jarring at times. And I found the more that I read it in sit-ins, and because luckily I was on holiday, so I was able to sort of like sit and read it for an hour, the less it bothered me. But every time I went back to it, I was a bit like, oh yeah, I've remembered there's no speech marks in this. And I've read other books where it's been like that and I haven't felt like that. So I don't know what it was about this particular book that made me feel like that. But yeah, in terms of like being a love letter to Italy and like creating all these marvellous characters, yeah, it was great. But I didn't love the writing style of it. And then the last two books, I read You People by Nikita Lalwani. We read this for Patreon Book Club. The theme was the immigrant experience, and this is a book set in a pizzeria. Every time I go to say that word, I can't say it properly. A pizzeria in London, where a lot of illegal immigrants work, and we're following two characters, a young woman, a young mixed race woman from Wales called Nia, and a chap called Shan from Sri Lanka. And Shan is here illegally, and it's those sort of experiences. And I sort of think the Nia character of someone from Wales was there to sort of like see like what privileges she has as a citizen of this country compared to what he doesn't have. And it's all sort of like centres around this character called Tuli, who is the proprietor of the pizzeria, and he is very keen to help out anyone who is in need. And I couldn't work out if he was good or if he was bad, and I felt like that was really going to be sort of answered by the end of the story, but it wasn't. I just felt like this lacked oomph, if I'm being honest. And when we discussed it at Patreon Book Club, a few people also felt like that. And the flow of it, although it was dual narrative, and that's something that I really like, a lot of the chapters were very, very short, and it meant that I never felt like I was in the flow with them. I still felt like the story was told in a way that it was readable and like fine. The whole thing felt fine, which is a sad thing to say, especially for Patreon Book Club, because I want them all to be bangers. Whatever happens, we always have a good discussion, so that's great, but I want them all to be bangers. But yeah, I didn't love it, and no one really loved it, so that's how that felt. The last book though that I read of the month, and I finished 2 days ago, and I'm still bloody thinking about it now, is Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kuang. You'll know that I read Babel earlier this year by this author and absolutely loved it. One of my favourite books of the year. This is also one of my favourite books of the year. I loved it. There's so much in it to unpack. So good. But if I just tell you the premise of it, and then we'll go from there. So you're introduced at the beginning of the book to two sort of loose friends. You're Athena Liu, who is a sort of darling of the literary world, a bit of a sort of like Sally Rooney character. Like every book they write is a banger, people love it, her aesthetic and all this sort of thing, and just amazing. And she's got this sort of like loose friend, June Hayward, who is also an author but hasn't had much, if any, success really. And after a night out that these two have gone on, and you're sort of hearing June's thoughts about Athena and how she doesn't really like her very much and all these things, I go back to Athena's house and Athena dies. She chokes to death on a pancake. Then what has happened is that then June is left alone in her flat, and there is a manuscript there for a book that Athena has finished but hasn't told anyone about. So June takes that, and then the book spirals from then. So that is enough of a premise, but the extra premise in that Athena is Asian American and June is white, and the book itself is about the Chinese during World War I, and draws upon sort of like experiences that maybe an Asian American would have compared to a white woman. Then it all sort of like flows from there. But there is just so much in here about plagiarism and appropriation, and it's thrilling. It's so thrilling. It's like from start to finish, and towards the end it gets a bit fucking creepy as well. Like I was really like, I had to finish it, and I love it when I was in bed and I was like feeling like I must go to sleep, I must go to sleep, but not tired at all because I was just so desperate to get to the end of it. So yeah, I thought this was I mean, I was about to literally say that, it says it here, this is one hell of a story, it's just not hers to tell. That's a perfect line, and I just think it was brilliant. You're right, David. Absolutely loved it. So yeah, I've gone and put a reservation on, there's a series that Rebecca's written, which starts with the book The Poppy Wars. I think it's a trilogy, maybe YA, maybe middle grade. I couldn't quite tell from the blurb. I got it out from the library, as in I've put a reservation on it, the blurb or the front cover, but I think maybe YA, but I've reserved those because I just think, yeah, this was fantastic. Very, very highly sort of blurbed and hyped this month, wasn't it? So those are the 9 books that I read in the month of June. Let me know what books you read in the month of June. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned. Let me know if you've read Yellowface, please. And I'll see you all again literally Saturday for my July TBR. See you then. Bye.